it. All right, so we're doing a little bit of an update on the train crash that happened in Ohio, because there's been some new details that have come out, some new concerns that people have, right? And we're going to go through them one by one and try to pin down what's going on with them, right? So the first one is Mr. J.D. Vance, the senator from Ohio, has put out a video. We can get it to play.
Run, and there's dead worms and dead fish all throughout this water.
He's put out a video, and the video shows him stirring up some chemicals in a creek nearby East Palestine. So we're going to talk about what's actually happening there and why J.D. Vance is just stoking fear with this thing. He's just trying to drum up support. He's not actually doing anything to help. But the video is at least interesting, and we'll cover it, right?
Water. So, something I just discovered is that if you scrape the creek bed, it's like chemical is coming out of the ground. Can you come here? And let me just show this to people. I don't know if you're going to see this on the camera, but watch this. Just see that chemical pop out of the creek. This is disgusting. And the fact that we have not cleaned up the train crash, the fact that these chemicals are still seeping in the ground is an insult to the people who live in East Palestine. Do not forget these people. We've got to keep applying pressure. That's how we're going to fix this problem. Thank you.
Okay, so first off, this chemical spill happened 2 weeks ago. How fast does he think it takes to clean this stuff up, right? It leached into the surrounding environment. It's going to take some time to get the stuff cleaned up. You cannot go out there and set up false expectations for what it is to expect, false expectations of what is possible, right? It's not possible to clean all that stuff up that fast. And so him going out there and saying that, in my opinion, is massively irresponsible, because people get this skewed idea of what should be happening with the cleanup effort and what the government should be doing. And it's for all intents and purposes, what was supposed to have happened in this situation has happened from a governmental standpoint. Like our EP or our cleanup efforts are a little bit stunted by lack of funding, but what else is new in the United States? You know, it's been so far a fairly straightforward cleanup operation. Plus, this is not the first time that we've had to clean up vinyl chloride leaching into the environment. We kind of know how to do it already, right? There was a train crash a decade ago in New Jersey that had vinyl chloride on it, where a bridge collapsed, and they dealt with it then too. So this is not new. This stuff takes time. We have sort of a time frame for how quickly things should go, and so far things have been going fairly well as far as like tracking with the time frame it takes to clean things up. All right, but so he claims, J.D. Vance claims, that there's chemicals in the streams near the site, right? Which everybody already knew this. This wasn't like surprising, right? The train crashed, and until cleanup crews got out there to stop the leaching of chemicals into the environment and to contain them in the best way possible, they were leaching into the environment. So you're going to be around, right? Now, that's not just necessarily to say that the chemicals are in the water supply, right? Because the water supply goes through, or if you're on the municipal water supply from the city, right? It goes through a whole cleaning process. So just because there's stuff in the water when it's coming into the plant doesn't mean there's stuff in the pipes coming out of the plant, right? That's why we have a water cleaning system that for municipal water, right? The concern here is that, and the government has said this, that if you have a well, if your house has a well near East Palestine, probably don't drink the water until you have had it tested, till the environment has thoroughly been checked for vinyl chloride or other chemicals leaching through the groundwater, right? And so it's consistent what the government has been saying is consistent with them being safe with this situation, as safe as is reasonably possible, right? Because the blame for this is not on the government. It's on the, well, it's partially on the government, but it's mostly on the train companies prioritizing cost cutting over safety, right? That's what's been happening with this whole thing ever since it started. Is the maintenance was not done properly to the car, which caused a wheel bearing to fail, and the wheel bearing caused the train derailment. So that's the main cause of this, not the government. The government is just handling the cleanup process. It's handling what happens later. And while the government is being fairly weak when it comes to like going after the corporations and changing the rules and enforcing legislation that had previously been enacted and then pulled back by Trump. And there's a whole backstory of like why this could have happened, right? Why it was legal for this to happen. And but that's where the government has failed, is like in the proper regulation of the rail companies to force them to do things safely. And it's hilarious that somebody like J.D. Vance, who is all about anti-regulation, is over here complaining that this hasn't been cleaned up. Well, it's like you as a senator want the EPA to be burdened with the inability to do stuff. So it's really funny that he's the guy going out there and being like, it's ridiculous the EPA hasn't cleaned this up. First off, it takes a long time, and second off, you're part of the reason why it's taking longer and why it happened in the first place. But Mike DeWine, the governor of Ohio, he comes out and he explains correctly what is happening. I'm not a big fan of DeWine, but when emergencies happen, ever since he's been elected governor, he's done a decent job at handling emergencies. His actual policy positions are kind of garbage, but he has done a decent job at handling emergencies. He did a good job during COVID. He's kind of handling this with a certain amount of grace. He's bringing in the proper things to deal with it on the state level. He's getting FEMA involved. Like he's doing okay with this, right? So he comes out and he says, DeWine said a polluted section of Sulphur Run stream was dammed in 2 places shortly after the accident to prevent other local waterways from contamination. He said teams were pumping clean water from the eastern dam, funneling it away from the contaminated section of the stream and releasing it back to the western dam to divert clean water after the contamination. This allows clean water to bypass the area of the derailment and prevents clean water from picking up contaminants and carrying them into the waterways. The remediation of water in the direct area of the spill is going to take some time, just as it is taking some time to deal with the dirt. This is not a simple process, he added. We are encouraging people to continue to avoid that area. Okay, so now Vance was in Leslie Run Creek, so we're gonna look here at what the Ohio EPA has said about the water quality in the creeks, right? It says, water quality sampling taken February 10th shows very low levels of 2 contaminants, butyl acrylate and ethyl hexyl acrylate. Nailed those pronunciations. And Leslie Run, which dissipates quickly, and no detections of butyl acrylate in North Fork Little Beaver Creek or Little Beaver Creek. There was a much lower level of ethyl hexyl acrylate found in North Fork Beaver Little Beaver Creek. Jesus, these names. Little Beaver Creek did not have any ethyl hexyl acrylate. No vinyl chloride has been detected in any of these waterways. Sulphur Run flows into Leslie Run, which flows into North Fork Little Beaver Creek, which flows into Little Beaver Creek, which discharges into the Ohio River. The water quality in Sulphur Run continues to be impacted because an impoundment was created on February 8th when Sulphur Run was rerouted using a dam and pump to isolate the area contaminated by the train derailment. This ensures no additional contaminants would move downstream and allows contractors to focus on removing the contaminants from the section of Sulphur Run that was affected. Further data updates will be posted within 24 to 48 hours after receipt of the laboratory's final data package for each sampling event. And then you can see here, if you want to, you can go to the Ohio EPA website and you can pull up their actual sampling data from the days that they pulled it, as early as February 12th, which was 8 days ago, right? So I pulled up a map here to show exactly what they're talking about. So the train crash happened here. right? Happened here on this rail line near Sulphur Creek, or Sulphur Run, right? And State Line Lake here, this is the dam that they're talking about. This lake here is created by a dam. So they discharge from the dam down Sulphur Run through East Palestine, and then that meets up with Leslie Run right here. Okay, and this is where J.D. Vance was doing his thing, right? Was on a section probably right here, actually, of Leslie Run. And so what happened is the train crashes here, and until they can get there, so the chemicals are going to run down Sulphur Run into Leslie Run right here. But very shortly after they arrived on scene to assess the situation, they put 2 dams up. They put one further down on Sulphur Run, like right here, and they put one back here on Sulphur Run to prevent any runoff from the extremely contaminated area directly near the train crash from getting into the other waterways, because you'll see Sulphur Run terminates here at State Line Lake. There's no inflow from this lake, right? And it goes downhill to here. So if they trap the contaminants in this area, they can't flow downstream. They can still slowly worm their way through the ground, right? But as far as like running downriver, which is the very quick way of doing it, it can't do that because it's stuck between these 2 points. And then they pumped water from State Line Lake all the way down into Leslie Run. Right here. And then Leslie Run travels south until it meets up with the North Fork Little Beaver Creek. So this is where they're getting their water samples from, and then this runs from here into the Ohio River. So they're saying that they've detected no levels of vinyl chloride and no outstanding levels of the other 2 chemicals in any of the waterways outside of Sulphur Run, where they've dammed it off and trapped it there, right? So it's going to have high concentrations there. But J.D. Vance puts a video up where he's at Leslie Run, pretty close to where Sulphur Run is, and he's dragging up the chemicals, right? He's pulling them up out of the water, which is going to happen because vinyl chloride is heavier than water, so it sits on the bottom. So any trapped vinyl chloride from the initial spill is going to be on the bottom of the river. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's dangerous, right? Because everything, like I've said 100 times, everything has a dosage limit, and people are not drinking directly from the river. And since it's heavier than water, it will sort of like settle on the bottom, and the water will create a separated layer, and they don't really mix unless you stir them up, right? This is a known thing that has happened with other chemical spills. If you just kind of leave it alone, it'll settle on the bottom and be buried over time, right? So you can do that with chemicals that like vinyl chloride that are fairly unstable in the environment. It will break down over time, right? Because it's an active chemical that they use in PVC pipes. Now, that doesn't mean that it's inherently dangerous, although vinyl chloride does have long-term effects. Short-term, it's pretty benign, and you have to have really high doses of it to, like, it basically works the same as like as an anesthetic, right? It kind of like puts you to sleep, maybe gives you a little headache or something, and in really high doses it can knock you out and impede your lung function. But you're talking about, you have to take a hit of that stuff like direct out of a tank to get that level, right? So if you drink the water directly out of the creek, yeah, you know, given how recent this happened, you're probably going to have some headaches or some stuff like that, right? But it's not a huge amount. It's not a dosage that you should have to worry about. And since vinyl chloride is only fatally toxic in super high doses or over really long periods of time, you know, it will work its way out of the environment provided they stop the leaching of further chemicals into the environment, which is why they burned off the vinyl chloride that was still in the tankers, right? They burned all that off. That was to stop it from running down the river system into the Ohio River watershed. So this is all sort of standard cleanup procedure here. They're testing their water, they're testing wells, they're testing air quality in people's houses, and everything is coming back normal or as close to normal as is not worth worrying about, right? Because there's always some contaminants in the air. A car drives by and nitrous oxide emissions in your immediate area go up. That's how it works, right? And the chemicals that are going into the air from burning it and the chemicals that are in the water require really high doses to hurt you. And the highest dosage is stuck in Sulphur Run, where they've dammed it off and burnt it off. Okay, so now we want to talk about excuse me. So now we want to talk about what the sheen is. The sheen, or sorry, we want to talk about what's being done about the sheen in the river, right? Because so far they're concentrating their cleanup efforts here in Sulphur Run, reasonably so. That's where the worst of it is, right? And they want to get that cleaned up before they can move to other parts, because they may clean up, if they can clean up Leslie Run, they'll clean that up and then it'll just get contaminated again because Sulphur Run is so bad, right? So they need to get Sulphur Run cleaned up as quickly as possible. And Leslie Run is so little contamination is in Leslie Run that they're having trouble picking it up on their tests, right? And so what will be done in the future about the Leslie Run sort of sheen chemical that's coming up in the river, right? And the answer is it would be very hard to clean it up. They basically have to vacuum the entire bottom of the creek to pull it out. Now, should they do that? Yes. But this is the United States, where cleanup efforts are massively underfunded by design from, you know, libertarians and conservatives out there. They don't want this stuff funded on a normal basis. It's only when stuff happens where they seem to care that this stuff is underfunded, right? So I don't have a lot of hope that they're going to clean that up. They're going to go to town on the whole area and clean it up completely. So the best case scenario would be the amount of vinyl chloride in the environment is below the limits where it will just sort of dissipate into the environment over time and won't cause any issues, which has yet to be seen if that is the case. But like I said before, vinyl chloride is not like, it's not acutely dangerous except in really high doses. It's long-term exposure. So if people in East Palestine are not getting long-term exposure to vinyl chloride at high enough levels for it to react in your body, then you're going to be fine, right? Because we come into contact with all kinds of things that in higher doses for longer periods of time can cause problems. Nitrates in sausage, right? There are people out there who cannot eat nitrates in sausage, and yet we eat it all the time. You know, we know that it can be cancerous, and yet we eat sausage all the time. It's just like all kinds of stuff can cause cancer. So vinyl chloride being in the environment in super low doses doesn't guarantee that you're going to get cancer from the vinyl chloride. You know, it's sort of a hard thing to pin down. What gives you your cancer? And it's very likely, given the history of other vinyl chloride cleanups in the past, that the cancer rate in an area around a vinyl chloride spill will not go up, because that's what happened in New Jersey, right? When the New Jersey train crash happened and they did their cleanup and then they started tracking cancer rates in the area, the specific type of cancer that vinyl chloride is known to cause, the rates did not go up in the area around the train crash. And they probably won't go up here, right? But so that's probably what's going to happen, right? And so we got a USA Today article here. It says the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency sets limits for what's deemed acceptable exposure to many chemicals, and says short-term exposure to high levels of vinyl chloride in the air can make people dizzy or give them headaches, while long-term exposure can cause liver damage, right? And there's another doctor at chair of Harvard's environmental health department that thinks that some of the sheen is from falling debris from the cloud of burnt chemicals, but everybody else that I've read seems to think it's vinyl chloride moving down the river, right? It says the information that I know as a public health expert, as well as from what the EPA is telling us right now, the EPA is letting us know that there are not dangerous levels of toxins in the water or the air at the current time. And Mike DeWine, the governor, has asked CDC doctors, experts to help screen area residents for illnesses, and state and federal experts are overseeing monitoring and cleanup efforts. The crash and subsequent fire released chemicals into the air and onto the ground and a stream nearby. Experts say the ground and water contamination likely pose the biggest risk now. The federal authorities have tested more than 450 homes for volatile organic compounds, which pose a health risk, and they have found none. Right? Private wells. The Ohio Department of Health Director Bruce Vanderhoff said Tuesday that the air and water quality around East Palestine is generally safe, but private wells are in the process of being tested. Until those results are in, Vanderhoff encouraged residents with private water supply to drink and use bottled water. So it's, and then a very good point that was brought up in this USA Today article down here talking about what's sort of happening with the EPA, right? Why is the response to this been like sort of up to code but also substandard at the same time? And it says many conservative lawmakers have complained the EPA has not responded aggressively enough to the spill. The EPA says Ohio and other federal agencies are better suited to assist. Vance in particular has attacked the EPA and challenged officials to drink the water in the streams in East Palestine, which the federal officials are not telling you to drink the water in the streams of East Palestine. They're telling you it's fine to drink the already cleaned water in the city water system, right? Those are two very different things. If your water comes from a lake, you don't go and get a cup of water from the lake, right? It goes through the water treatment system first. So him saying that is just stupid. Underlying the discussion, the EPA has 20% fewer employees than it did at its peak in '99, when about 18,100 people worked there. The EPA's annual budget hit a high of $10.3 billion in 2010, and today sits at $9.5 billion. If the budget had kept up with inflation, it would be $14 billion. In 2017, then President Trump proposed a 31% cut to the EPA's annual budget. Again, they don't want this stuff paid for until it's a problem, right? Although Congress ultimately rejected most of his cuts, not all of them though, they did do some cuts. And then President Biden has proposed a 2023 EPA budget of $11.8 billion, including hiring 1,900 workers. The 2021 bipartisan infrastructure law also provided billions in additional funding for programs overseen by the EPA, including environmental justice and cleanups. So that money would have been helpful here, right? Most of the EPA's funding actually gets passed through to states and local governments, according to the agency. Ohio is among 24 states, and this is important here, right? Ohio is among 24 states suing the federal government over the EPA's plans to toughen environmental regulations and pollution limits in small streams and wetlands over a long disputed Waters of the United States rule. That lawsuit was filed Thursday. This article was written, go up here to the top. It was written on February 17th, right? Which is, according to my absolutely trash ability to keep track of a calendar, was last Friday, which means that one day before this article was written, they filed a lawsuit that wanted to strip the EPA's ability to regulate water quality, just as they're complaining about the EPA not upkeeping water quality, upkeeping water quality. What is English? So that's. I mean, this is what they do, right? This is what all conservatives in this country do. They cut everything. They pull funding from every program. They deregulate to the point of recklessness, and then when something happens, they cry about it like something should have been done. It's like, yeah, something more should have been done, but you took away the ability for more to be done. And it's just insanely frustrating that this is something that they do all the time. And I really wish people could see through it, because there's so many people that I know. I'm not saying Democrats are better. Democrats have their own issues. They're pretty good on this particular thing, right? But they have their own issues that I can see through as somebody who would caucus with the Democrats. I don't like the Democrats, but I could caucus with if I was a politician, I would be caucusing with the Democrats, and I could see through their sort of mirage that they put out of like giving a shit about stuff. You know, they talk a good game, just like the Republicans talk a good game on like clean water and clean air, and then do the exact opposite. Democrats like to put on a good game face like economically, and then they just constantly break unions. You know, so both parties are guilty of this, but I can see it. And the Democrats also partially get held accountable for it. Whereas, like, no Republican, no, local Republican that I talk to has any idea that the Republicans are just gutting or trying to gut environmental protections while simultaneously complaining about not having environmental protections. And if they do, they don't care. And I cannot figure it out. But regardless, another potential problem with this is a chemical group called dioxins, right? And dioxins are pretty toxic stuff that gets into the environment. And it happens when you burn chemicals that have chlorine in it, chlorine in the chemical, right? And vinyl chloride, the chloride part of vinyl chloride is chlorine. And, so there's a concern from some people that these dioxins are getting into the environment and could cause problems, because we know that they cause, birth defects when they build up in your system, developmental disorders, all kinds of stuff, right? But, excuse me, the amount of environmental dioxins has gone down dramatically since we started regulating them in the 80s, right? So it says in the United Kingdom, the total intake of excuse me, depending on, hold on, e.g. United Kingdom the total intake of dioxins in 1982 was 239 picograms a day, right? And the limit you're trying to get to is like 2 to 3 picograms a day, right? It says here 1 to 2, but some others, I just went with 2 to 3 because I read some other articles that placed it at about there. So we'll just assume that Wikipedia's got a typo here, right? But it says 239 picograms a day. And in 2001, it was down to 21 picograms a day of dioxins, right? And, sorry, I screwed that up. You're trying to get down to 100 picograms a day, not 1 to 2. I read that wrong. 100 picograms a day. And in 2001, it was down to 21 from 239 in the United Kingdom. And the same sort of trajectory holds for the United States. So, and acute exposure to dioxins isn't widely reported to cause any negative health effects. It's long-term exposure. So if you get a whole bunch of dioxins in your body all at once, you'll flush those out over time, right? It's the constant sort of buildup of them in your system, and you get it mostly from eating food, and it's mostly evenly distributed all across the world. They kind of like just float into the environment and collect as a layer on the ground, which then gets eaten up by animals. So it's mostly like fish and meat and poultry and stuff like that will release these dioxins into your body over time. But large acute doses that would come from, say, burning the vinyl chloride has not been connected at all to any acute or long-term health effects, because your body will eventually flush it out, right? So as long as your average intake stays below the limit for your entire life, you're fine. And one large spike, even one 1,000 times higher than the average daily, the average recommended daily exposure, will not hurt you. right? As long as the average for your entire life stays below 100 picograms per kilogram per day. And so the dioxins thing is an actual concern, but it's a concern because you get exposed to it from the food that you eat over a long period of time, not short bursts from chemicals being burnt, right? That's why we have massive regulations on it, because it's hard to track. And that's why it was so high in the 1980s, was because it was not regulated. And once it was regulated, I'll pull up I'll see if I can pull this graph up. Yeah, look at that. Look at that. All right. So, and once it was regulated, starting in the 70s, right? Starting in the late 70s, going into the 80s, it fell by a factor of 90% in the environment. Because that's what good regulation does. We found out it was a problem. We found out we were putting it into the environment by burning chlorine chemicals, and started solving the problem, and bam, look at that, down 90%. And now we don't have birth defects that were cropping up in outsized numbers from dioxins. So yeah, that's the dioxins one was interesting. I'm glad I saw it. I'm glad somebody brought it up to me. But it again, it's another one of those things where it's like you don't really have to worry about it. Just don't drink the water right out of the river right now. Or ever, for that matter. You shouldn't drink water out of a river ever, not when we have clean water elsewhere. So let's talk. So then for the last time, we'll talk about what you should be doing. So what you should be doing is don't drink water from the wells until your well has been tested, and get your well tested periodically. If you're on the city water system is checked all the time. Just keep an eye on the checks that the EPA is doing on it. If they say it's fine, it's going to be fine. Right? If you're worried about it and you don't want to drink the water out of the water system, get some bottled water. It's not ideal, but that's an easy way around the issue.